Nel video che segue vedrai una mia chiacchierata con uno degli analisti tecnici più importanti d'America, un autore di 2 libri, analisi tecnica su multiple time frame e fare trading con il VWAP ancorato, che è un libro bellissimo perché va in profondità di uno degli indicatori, l'unico indicatore che io realmente utilizzo, che è il VWAP, e l'indicatore che viene da tutti chiamato comunemente come l'indicatore degli istituzionali. Un indicatore utilissimo che può dare realmente tante informazioni, ma soprattutto che può essere realmente utile se utilizzato nel modo in cui Brian consiglia. Brian è uno dei massimi esperti di VWAP, soprattutto di VWAP ancorato, e guardando questo video sono sicuro che troverai tanti spunti per inserire qualcuno di questi concetti all'interno della tua operatività. Come sempre, prima di guardare il video però ti consiglio di fare 2 cose. La prima è iscriverti a The Edge, trovi il link in descrizione, perché è una newsletter dove trovi tanti consigli e soprattutto dove ti mando anche tutti i recap di ciò che facciamo nella nostra sala operativa. E altra cosa riguarda proprio la sala operativa, ossia di andare a riservare un tour della nostra community, della nostra academy, della nostra sala operativa, così da capire cosa significa fare realmente trading come dei professionisti. Ora ti lascio il video, mi raccomando, guardalo tutto perché è pieno di contenuti.
Prima di tutto, grazie per essere con noi. Partirei con la prima domanda, Brian. Ricordi il momento esatto, un evento particolare, insomma, quel qualcosa che ha acceso la tua passione verso i mercati, verso il trading?
My passion for trading started, and by the way, thank you for having me. Um, Really, when I was probably about 12 or 13 years old, I used to watch a program with my father on Friday nights called Wall Street Week. This was back in the early 80s, 1980s. And, he was into the market a little bit, and I just kind of wanted to hang out with him on a Friday night and got the exposure to the market that way. And then there was one stock, a company in the Boston area where I was growing up, that was, at the time, Boston was considered the car theft capital of the world. And I, heard of this stock called LoJack and asked my dad about it. I said, "Hey, Dad, they said that this company, tracks down stolen cars. Would that be a good stock?" He said, "Sure, let's buy some." Anyways, long story short, I put up $500. He put up $4,500, and we bought 1,000 shares. In the next 3 months, the stock doubled, and me as a 13-year-old just made $5,000. So I thought I was going to be a billionaire, and that really just kind of got me hooked.
Ah, ok, quindi hai iniziato subito con tuo padre, bello, quindi le storie che nascono in questo modo sono sempre quelle che poi vanno più lontane, perché si parte da piccoli, insomma. E appunto in questo viaggio nel trading sei stato più autodidatta oppure hai avuto delle figure chiave, non so, non vorrei dire mentori, però delle figure chiavi a cui ispirarti, degli investitori, insomma, famosi piuttosto che storici, che hanno modellato un pochino il tuo approccio al mercato azionario?
So after that early success, I had the bug basically. I was hooked on the market to a degree. And the first book that I read that really made a lot of sense for me was Stan Weinstein's book, Secrets for Profiting in Bull and Bear Markets. I devoured that book. And after that kind of helped me discover technical analysis. And that's really what got me to the point where, hey, I think I can make some sense of price action. So I didn't have a mentor in particular, but I started as a retail stockbroker in 1991. And the senior broker I was working for would use charts along with fundamental analysis. So I definitely learned a lot from him. And then I learned a lot from the School of Hard Knocks, just getting my teeth kicked in and learning, to cut losses and, to find the right winners at the right time, basically.
Ok, interessante già l'approccio, no? Riferito a gestire le perdite, che poi è l'aspetto più importante nel nostro lavoro. E a tal proposito, visto che questo vuole essere un'intervista con dei professionisti, dei punti di riferimento per chi appunto vuole imparare come trarre profitto dai mercati, voglio farti questa domanda. Quale sfide hai dovuto superare nel tuo percorso nel trading? Cioè, quali sono state le problematiche più importanti che hai dovuto affrontare subito e che hai dovuto necessariamente risolvere velocemente per poter andare avanti poi nel tuo percorso?
You know, the biggest challenge was probably recognizing that the market simply doesn't care about my opinion. And I found it to be very dangerous to my trading to know more about the company. So the more I would read about a company, I would think, hey, that's a great product. Hey, they're increasing sales. The stock's going down. It must be a bargain. And I think a lot of people start out that way. But the fact is, if it's in a downtrend, you can just throw the fundamentals away. They simply don't matter. And that's something that I've been very good at, because every time I've tried to buy a stock because of fundamentals, but the price action and back it up, those have always been my biggest losers. So that was the big one. The second, biggest challenge I had after I kind of let go of that with, buying stocks in downtrends, was buying a stock in an uptrend that was getting hit hard. So buying the dip. I'm kind of known for the saying, don't buy the dip, buy strength after the dip. And, if you buy a stock you think is in a dip, you don't know that it's going to turn around. You're hoping it is. You can, buy at a VWAP, a Fibonacci level, or a moving average, and think that there's going to be support there. But the stock just continues to go down through that. So I always would rather be late to a bounce trade than to be early, because I want to be dealing in a position of strength. I want to buy strength after the dip, not as it's pulling back, because it gets too painful.
E quindi deduco che se mi hai detto che appunto basare le proprie scelte di acquisto di un'azione sul fatto che il prodotto possa essere buono o qualsiasi cosa, mi fa pensare che tu, lo so, ti conosco bene, che tu sia un trader tecnico, che quindi si affida moltissimo a analisi tecniche, ora ci arriveremo nello specifico. Però voglio chiederti, trovi che l'ampia diffusione che dai tuoi inizi ad oggi ha avuto analisi tecnica verso appunto tutto il mondo retail ne abbia un pochino minato l'efficacia, ne abbia ridotto l'efficacia rispetto a quando hai iniziato tu e quindi magari eravate in pochi a saperla padroneggiare?
I think that's a good point. I mean, markets evolve, but they're always supply and demand driven. That's what drives stock prices. I think that one thing that's kind of changed a lot since I began was you used to be able to buy a breakout and make money just like automatically. Now, most breakouts, or I can't say most of them because I haven't done a study, but a lot of what people consider to be breakouts, they'll break out and then they'll fail. What's important to recognize, and this kind of takes me back to your earlier question, is mistakes, is that I think one of the biggest mistakes people make is chasing a move that's already underway. So I always say, where has it come from and where does it have the potential to go? So if the stock, ran from 20 and it breaks out at 23, well, you've got to consider that move from 20 to 23 in the prior week, a 15% move, that breakout is going to get sold into most of the time. So it's a question of chasing a move and asking yourself, is the risk worth the reward, the perceived risk? Because we don't know what the actual risk is, because the market, something unexpected might happen. So the point to your question about, have the charts changed? They have somewhat, in that there's more traps, but if you can recognize what those traps are. So for instance, you'll see a stock going sideways and then it dips down. Let's say we had support in that stock between $20 and $20.50. It drops down to $19.75, and then it pops back up into that range. Well, that makes it a stronger candidate for a push past that 20 and a half level, because we've established that we've shaken the weaker holders out. We've probably lured some short sellers in. And you have to think of the psychology of the participants based on what you're seeing on the chart rather than just taking it at face value.
Chiaro, chiaro. E sulla psicologia ci torniamo dopo, perché uno strumento, un indicatore che tu usi moltissimo, anzi che hai proprio teorizzato, io lo uso proprio per questo. Io opero nel mercato small cap e nel segmento small cap, e sono prevalentemente uno short seller, ed uso il tuo indicatore principe, il VWAP, come misuratore un pochino della psicologia dei partecipanti in quell'azione. Però ci arriviamo per gradi. Volevo chiederti un'altra cosa. Cosa pensi dell'intelligenza artificiale nel trading, cioè, nei mercati in realtà, nei mercati in generale, se pensi che potrà portare sostanzialmente dei benefici ai trader retail, oppure se pensi che possa andare in qualche modo a minimizzare il vantaggio competitivo dei trader retail sui mercati?
I'm a big fan of AI in general. I mean, if I'm going to look at some information about a company, I will use AI to ask, hey, give me the pros and cons fundamentally for this stock so I can have an understanding of the psychology of what shapes the fundamentals. So for that, I'm a big fan of AI, but I think as far as it being able to create trading systems and that sort of thing, I think there's a lot of hype there. You open up Instagram, all you see is AI stock picks for Forex, AI options, AI, this. It's a bunch of nonsense, is what I think. I look at it and it's a buzzword that a lot of marketers are latching onto right now. I don't think there's any substance behind 99% of the advertising you see based around it. So I'm always a fan of human intelligence. How do we synthesize the data that AI gives us, along with trying to read the chart, understand the psychology of what's driving participants, not just on the chart, but fundamentally as well, and then coming up with an intelligent plan based around the perceived risk reward for that trade, and then being able to implement that trade with ironclad discipline.
E a tal proposito, ti andrebbe di descrivere, senza andare troppo nello specifico ovviamente per motivi di tempo, però il processo di selezione di un titolo per te, cioè come identifichi un'azione che è potenzialmente interessante e magari qualche criterio che deve avere per soddisfare appunto questo tuo processo di selezione, quando magari arrivi davanti agli schermi e dici ok, c'è questa azione che si muove, qual è il processo che segui per dire ok, è una potenziale candidata?
Most of my trade candidates are found just by looking at charts. I will go through on the weekend. I have what I call my master list of stocks, which is about 1,000 stocks. I'll go through each and every one of those on 6 different time frames. Now, it doesn't take as long as it might sound because I've been doing it for a long time, but I'll narrow that list of 1,000 down to about maybe 200 stocks that I want to watch the following week. And then every day I will look at those 200 stocks for my candidates for the next day. So on Monday, I have my focus list, which might be about 30 stocks. At the end of the day on Monday, I'll go through that list of 200 stocks again, and I'll narrow down my focus list for Tuesday. I'll set a bunch of alerts on those stocks. If I see that there's earnings on it, I'll look to see when the earnings are due so I don't get blindsided by that. If I like the chart, it looks like it's maybe getting ready to break out into a longer term, out of a stage 1 accumulation into a stage 2 uptrend, let's say on a weekly chart, then I will look at the fundamentals and say, is there a fundamental story that investors might be latching onto? Because if there are strong fundamentals, that just gives other people the confidence to hold more than a stock with, sketchy fundamentals. So it's all based on multiple time frame analysis of many charts. And then if I see something really interesting, then I'll start to look at the fundamentals, or I might also look at short interest, which is, of course, a technical factor because it's based on the supply and demand of the stock. So those are the main factors that I'm looking for, and it's all about multiple time frame analysis.
Ok, e sempre a tal proposito, nel tuo libro Technical Analysis Using Multiple Time Frames, hai sottolineato appunto l'importanza di un'analisi multi-time frame. Potresti spiegarci perché la consideri così importante, vitale?
Yeah, as a swing trader, I look at stocks that I think are going to move from one day to maybe 3 to 4 weeks at a time. And you can look at a market and say, are we in a bull market or a bear market? And really, those titles mean nothing to me. Sure, we want the wind at our back and, be long when we're in a bull market. But just because we're in a bull market doesn't mean every stock is going to be going up, or that a normal pullback might be 10, 15%. We've seen that in the market leaders like NVIDIA. We've seen, I think, two pullbacks of greater than 15, 20% this year, and the stock is still up, 250% or so. So if you're buying when the stock is down 10%, and then the next day it's down 12%, the day after that it's down 15%, you're not thinking you're in a bull market. You're in your own little personal bear market as you're losing a lot of money. So I don't want to, I want the trends aligned, which is, the reason the first book is called, profiting from trend alignment. So in other words, we see a stock in a stage 2 uptrend on the daily time frame. I don't want to buy it as it's pulling back. Because again, we don't know if it's going to pull back 5%, 10%, 15%, or just fail altogether. I don't want to buy at a moving average because I think it might be support. I want to see it test that moving average. And if it fails, no problem. I didn't own it. I can just wait. So then I look for the next level, and maybe it's at the year-to-date anchored VWAP. And then I look to a shorter term time frame and say, hey, it's back above the daily VWAP. I'm going to give it a try here with a stop below this low, $1.50 away in NVIDIA. And then if it gets above the 2-day VWAP, I might take a little bit off. So it's all about letting the stock prove itself to me rather than assuming I'm correct and saying, hey, I bought this good stock. I'm going to make money. Instead, I look at it and say, okay, now I own the stock. The stock has to prove itself to me that I can hold it. It's up to the stock to tell me, not my opinion of what I think is the best company in the world, or what their fundamentals are, or what some analysts might have said.
Chiaro, quindi tu non sei uno di quelli a cui piace accumulare su un'azione, diciamo, debole, ma piuttosto vuoi vedere sempre prima la forza, giusto? Vuoi vedere prima una conferma dell'inizio di un movimento, anche a costo magari di perdere un po' il timing.
Absolutely. Yeah. 100%. There's a phrase I like, which is, it's better to be on the sidelines wishing that you were in than it is to be in the market and wishing you were out. To me, the pain of a loser is greater than the fear of missing out.
Chiaro, chiaro. Vabbè, io comprendo perfettamente, questo è un approccio trend following. Io avendo più un approccio di mean reversion, ovviamente ho un approccio un po' diverso nell'ingresso, quindi devo cercare magari di cominciare un po' di size, anche un po' in anticipo, quindi era questo il punto, molto molto interessante. E altro libro molto 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 interessante che ho letto, tuo, è il libro Maximum Trading Gain with Anchor VWAP. Punto di riferimento ormai per chi appunto ama questo indicatore, che a me piace tantissimo, il VWAP, sia l'Anchor VWAP che il VWAP normale, lo uso sempre, è l'unico indicatore che uso sul grafico. E tra l'altro consiglio a chi non avesse letto di farlo, perché è un'intuizione, una teorizzazione molto 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 veramente brillante, secondo me, dell'utilizzo del VWAP. E ci spieghi un pochino come sei arrivato, prima di tutto, proprio a teorizzarlo, cioè come ti è venuta in mente questa idea rispetto a questo utilizzo di questo strumento indicatore.
Sure. Well, the VWAP, as I'm sure you know, is for one day. So the traditional VWAP says the genesis of the VWAP was a tool for institutions to determine whether or not they were getting a fair execution for their order. So if I ran a hedge fund and I wanted to buy, 500,000 shares of NVIDIA, I would give that order to Merrill Lynch, let's say. Merrill Lynch would come back and say, okay, we bought you 500,000 shares. Your price was 126. I'll look at it and go, well, is that good? Is that bad? It closed at 127. So maybe that was good. But the low was 123 and the high was 128. If I look at the average price the stock traded at during the day, and it was 125.20. In other words, the volume weighted average price represents the average price that every single share traded hands at. So if the average price was 125.50 and I paid 126, well, I paid 50 cents more per share than I should have on a 500,000 shares. That's $250,000. That broker did not do a good job for me. So it gave a way for institutions to determine if they were in fact getting a good average price. That's the traditional VWAP. The anchored VWAP, as you know, is when we start from any point other than the beginning of a day. It might be as a small cap, as someone who short stocks, that are, overheated and you're going against the trend. You might look at let's say the stock ran, from 9:30 a.m. from $3 up to $5, and then it pulled back to the VWAP at $4.38, and then it bounces. Well, what you might want to do is put an anchor on that 10 a.m. high of $5 per share. And what you'll see is as the stock bounces from the daily VWAP of 438, it might run up to $4.67, which is the anchor from the high, and then get rejected right there. So you can do it on an intraday basis, like from the 10 o'clock high, from the 11:16 a.m. low, or whatever it might be. Or you can do it from what I'll often use is the prior day's VWAP. And these are all, strategies I wrote about in detail in the book. The prior day's VWAP, the week to date, the year to date. The S&P 500 just bounced dramatically from the year to date anchor. The year to date anchor was down at 513 and change, 2 weeks ago. And here we are at 556 today. So huge bounce from there. And it's not the first time it bounced from that level. And same with NVIDIA. So the anchor is, oftentimes from an important event that the market thinks is important. So, some people will say, well, Brian, I bought the stock at $5.12. So I started my anchor there. And, that's not the point of the VWAP. The VWAP is what's the average participant in the market, not you. It's not about you. It's about what everyone else is doing. So if, for instance, a company reported earnings a week and a half ago, it gapped up, it ran for 2 or 3 days, and then it pulls back to the volume weighted average price from that earnings event, what you'll see often is there are buyers holding at that anchor from the gap. So what they're doing is saying, we like this stock. We want to own it for the next several months. So we're going to pay the average price. We don't want to pay way too much and chase the stock. So those are, some of the key levels. And the reason, and I wrote about this in the book, was if you remember back to the GameStop saga, and they went in front of Congress to testify about what happened there. Ken Griffin, who runs the Citadel, in 2022, that guy made more money than anyone in the history of the market, personal money. When he went to Congress to talk about the way that orders are executed, because they were trying to determine how, whether a company like Citadel is ripping off the public, basically. What he said was, the majority of the orders are algorithmic orders, and the majority of those algorithmic orders are based around VWAP for a day, a few days, or longer. So he basically said, the largest participant in the market, they control, I think, 30% of all volume in the US. said, this is how we execute our orders. So when a guy like that starts telling you, here's how we execute orders, and then you start seeing it on the charts, hey, why is there support at that volume weighted average price from the earnings? Because there's buy programs there. And what we're doing is we're gleaning into the psychology of what drives that major market participant to buy at a certain point. It doesn't mean we have to buy there, but it means we should definitely be interested to see if they continue to buy in that area and provide support. Because if they do and the stock starts to bounce from there, then we want to be involved and set our stop just in case they turn that program off or a bigger seller comes in or whatever, changes in the market dynamics.
Fantastico, fantastico, fantastico. E sempre riguardo all'Anchor VWAP, preferisci un utilizzo o li combini un po' come fai con i time frame? Preferisci un utilizzo più intraday o più multi-day, inteso come andare ad utilizzarlo sul time frame magari giornaliero, time frame daily? E poi una cosa che sto utilizzando io particolarmente come punto di osservazione per vedere proprio anche identificare dei livelli potenzialmente di supporto, comunque dove comprare, accumulare un po' di azioni, è usare l'Anchor VWAP dal giorno di un earnings particolarmente buono, dove c'è un gap importante, tanti volumi, e da lì in poi molto spesso quando si va a ancorare il VWAP a quella giornata di earnings sembra quasi magia molto spesso come il prezzo risponde proprio per quello che hai detto tu. Quindi come preferisci usarlo tu? Più un ambito più daily, multi-day o più sull'intraday?
Just the same as I would with anything else is intraday. So, very similar to a 20-day moving average. We often know that a 20-day moving average will find buyers. I'll look at that 20-day moving average on the daily chart, and then I'll look at my chart on a shorter term time frame and say, hey, wait a minute, that's also the volume weighted average price from that low 2.5 weeks ago, or from that high a week and a half ago. So I like to use them in conjunction with different time frames. When we came down to the year-to-date anchor in NVIDIA, I was aware that that had the potential to become a level where buyers would show up. So I didn't want to buy just because we're at the year-to-date anchor, because that's based on, at this point, 160 days in the year. That's where we are in this market. So instead, I look at it and say that's a big level. That's a big level that institutions are likely to be buying. So what I want to do is look to the shorter term time frame and say, hey, we gapped up, we pulled back on a 1-minute chart for today. We gapped up, we pulled back, we sold off a little bit, but then we got back above the daily volume weighted average price. When we get back above that daily volume weighted average price, that's when I know the buyers are in control for that day at that point. So in other words, we saw it hit the year-to-date anchor, it gapped up, it sold off a little bit on some normal profit taking. Some people were probably selling it short. They had their opportunity to try to crush it down to make new lows, but instead the buyers came in, and we knew for a fact as it got back above the daily VWAP that the buyers were back in control. So that's where I want to generally be a buyer, as long as it didn't run 3 points to get there. But if it came up and I can set a reasonable stop, then I want to buy above the daily VWAP. But I'm also basing my analysis on, hey, this is an important level on the year-to-date volume-weighted average price.
Ok, Brian, fantastico, fantastico, fantastico. A me è uno strumento che veramente mi ha dato tanti spunti in più, soprattutto per fare swing e avere un timing anche ottimale degli ingressi, veramente interessante. Tu sei su mercati da oltre 30 anni sostanzialmente. Come sono cambiati? Cioè, cosa hai visto cambiare in modo più importante nel tempo?
I don't think they've really changed a lot. It was probably about 10 years ago when the HFT was really kind of really messed the markets up. Is that, high frequency program trading was kind of the race to zero, meaning there were certain institutions that had a speed advantage. Other institutions couldn't compete with them, so they all kind of had to put the money in to catching up technologically. And that disrupted the market for probably a good year or so. So that was one change. In the time that I've been in the market, we've gone from fractions to decimals. And that didn't really, it just made the spreads tighter. It made them fairer. We've gone from, commissions, full service commissions, a couple $100 for a buy, a couple $100 for a sell, to discount commissions, to no commissions. So it's gotten a lot fairer for the retail trader. We don't have to pay a toll each time we buy and sell. And now we're seeing that same thing in options as well. I'm trading options for free. In fact, I get paid order rebates for trading options. That saves me several $1,000s per year. The commissions, I remember back, 10 years ago, I was paying probably 6 figures in commissions every single year. That's money back in my pocket. So the market has gotten fairer. It's gotten more competitive in that you can't just read a book on technical analysis that shows you head and shoulders patterns and cups and handles and look to buy those patterns, because they're just too obvious at this point. They get sold into by the predatory algorithms. So you've got, of course, the algorithms that buy at the year-to-date anchor, but then you've got predatory algorithms that say, hey, the stock's breaking out. That's likely attracting retail money. Let's sell short to them, drive the stock down a point, buy it back, and then it's free to go. So, supply and demand is always, those are the laws of supply and demand, not the theory of supply and demand. So supply and demand always rules the markets. They've just gotten fairer, but they've also gotten more competitive and probably a little bit more sophisticated, I guess, because of that.
Chiaro. E sei d'accordo con la frase che dicono un po' tutti, no? Che il trading è 90% mindset e 10% tecnica o capacità tecnica?
In a way I do. It's the psychology of what you're reading on the chart that matters more than people give it credit for. So everyone gives credit to 90% personal psychology, but I think that it's maybe 50% personal psychology, and I'm just making these numbers up, and 50% the psychology of what you read on the chart. So in other words, can you try to understand who's doing what in the market at certain points and why they're doing it? Not just looking at, I talk a lot about an inverted head and shoulders pattern. Like, people will get all excited because it's got a head and shoulders pattern. The only thing a head and shoulders pattern is a transition from a series of lower highs and lower lows to a higher low, and then the pattern is complete when it makes a higher high. So the only thing a head and shoulders pattern is a change of trend. That's all it is. You take away your shoulders, your heads, your necklines. What you're seeing is lower highs and lower lows go to higher highs and higher lows. So understand that, and understand that on multiple time frames, and learn to anticipate what's going to happen at key levels. That is more important psychology than what people give it credit for. So maybe I'm splitting hairs by saying it's not necessarily technical analysis, but I view technical analysis, a lot of people look at the patterns, the cups and handles, head and shoulders, breakouts, and also, candlestick patterns. I think they're just a complete waste of time. You're, identifying these little candle patterns rather than looking inside the candle and saying, what happened on the shorter term time frame? Where were we in relation to the VWAP and that sort of thing? You get a much clearer, more objective picture of what's going on under the surface, and how you interpret that, plus how you implement it with your own psychology, together make that 100% of it psychology.
Perfetto, 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 concordo. E poi è un mix di entrambe le cose. Io, vabbè, operando nel segmento small cap, ho un approccio anche un po' più fondamentale, nel senso che di base io cerco di sfruttare poi le inefficienze che si creano, no? Con quei gap enormi dovuti a notizie che sono un po' così, insomma, non proprio solidissime. Quindi vado poi a applicare un approccio di tipo di main reversion, quindi dove sostanzialmente poi l'apporto dell'analisi tecnica non è enorme, però è importante, ed è molto importante invece la consistenza mentale nell'eseguire, non uscire fuori diciamo, dai binari, e soprattutto non diventare emotivi, perché poi la chiave è tutta lì. Quale consiglio daresti a un trader che sta cercando consistenza nei risultati? Cioè, uno di quelli che si trova a un passo, magari è a break even, fa tante cose bene, ne fa magari poche male che però mangiano quelle che ha fatto bene, quindi è lì per diventare consistente. Che consiglio gli daresti?
I think for that, one of the keys is, experimenting with position size and where your conviction comes, where your results are coming from. If you find a certain setup that you're making more money in, then you've got to size up a little bit more in those types of trades. And the ones that are, break even over and over again, if you can identify something about those trades that, the way I look at trades is I have my A list, my B list, and my C list. My A list, those are the ones I'm paying the most attention to. The B list ideas, they might need a day or two to set up, but I'm still going to set some alerts on them in case they start to move today. So on those B list ideas, I'll set alerts and I might still trade them, but I might trade them with only half of a risk unit because I don't think they're quite ready yet. But the risk might be, hey, they're going, so I should be involved, but I can't risk a full, unit of risk. And then the C list ideas are just ones that I want to kind of get familiar with a little bit more. So back to when I said I might have 30 watch list ideas for today. I never intend to trade all 30 of those, but I might have 3 A list ideas, 6 B list ideas, and then would we leave me with 22 C list ideas, just ideas that I want to check in on once or twice a day, see how they're setting up, become familiar with how they trade. So when they do become a B list or an A list idea, I understand their personality a little bit. So try to be more anticipatory about the trades you see rather than just reactive. So if you see a stock that today is day one breakout on a small cap going from 2 to 3, and maybe it's going to go for 3 to 4 days, start watching that as it's going up until you get to become familiar with the way it trades before you take that opposite side and short it on the way down.
Ok, chiaro. In chiusura, Brian, hai un'operazione che ti ricordi, cioè quella la più folle, non so, che ha avuto l'esito più inaspettato, insomma, proprio quella che quando ci ripensi ancora in qualche modo ti brillano gli occhi o ti brillano gli occhi o ti ha fatto arrabbiare, cioè una delle due, cioè l'operazione proprio che ti ricordi nella tua carriera. Ti va di condividerla con noi?
I tend to remember my losers more than my winners. And that's because I spend more time thinking about them.
Sì.
So there's been a handful of them that have, stung me in the past. And, every time I look back at my bigger losers, I know what I did wrong. It was me. It wasn't the market. It wasn't the market makers. It wasn't the institution or somebody running stops or all the excuses that people love to use. We've got to take responsibility for what we do in the market. And, all of my bigger losers have been because I've done something dumb, something simple and dumb. And I've, averaged down into a stock thinking, oh, I got it this time. I'll just buy twice as much here. I'll just keep averaging down. And then finally, it just keeps going lower and, puking it out at the lows. You get people say you get what you want in the market. I don't think that's true, that nobody wants those losers, but I think you get what you deserve. If you throw caution to the wind and you do dumb things with your money, then you deserve to lose it. We're competing in a high performance sport against the sharpest minds on the planet, trying to take our money from us. If we aren't paying attention or slip up or do something stupid, we deserve to get punished for it. So we've got to stay, steadfast in our discipline and make sure that we do cut those losers as quick as possible, because otherwise you start getting into that vicious spiral where you think, well, it can't go any lower. I've got to buy more. And we've all been there. And that's where my biggest losers have always been.
Sì, mi hai dato uno spunto, perché tantissime persone ignorano non so come facciano, ma sottovalutano il fatto che questo sia, come hai detto tu, uno sport iper competitivo di performance, quindi è un'arena dove bisogna essere sempre al top. Proprio l'ultimissima domanda, mi ha dato questo spunto: quali sono secondo te le 2-3 caratteristiche fondamentali a livello personale, proprio come skill personali, che un aspirante trader di successo dovrebbe avere? Cioè, qual è l'identikit di una persona che può farcela?
I think you have to have a little bit of a bad attitude. By that, I mean, you have to question things. Don't accept everything for face value. Just because someone on TV says it doesn't mean it's true. Just because somebody with a large Twitter following doesn't mean they're any good. There's a lot of mediocre traders with big audiences. There's people with big audiences who don't even trade. They give the illusion they do, but I could name a handful. I would never do it, but I could name a handful of them that I know don't trade. And that's disingenuous. The market is, again, it's for the highly skilled. So, hone your skills, practice at a small level before you decide to, engage in a larger position sizes, and have absolute steadfast discipline that the market simply doesn't care what you think. As soon as you start to believe that this company is a good one or a bad one, and you start shorting it because you think it's a bad company, but the stock is going up, well, guess what? You're wrong, not the stock. And don't fall back on the excuse, oh, I was right, but my timing was off. This is the business of timing. That's not an excuse. That's the reason that you lost a lot of money. So take personal responsibility and question things question the face value, question the status quo, and let your results guide you, really.
Brian, ti ringrazio di tutto il valore che hai condiviso con noi, per essere stato con noi. È stato molto 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 piacevole, bello, informativo e sono molto 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 contento. Ti ringrazio ancora, ti saluto.
Prego.
Grazie mille, Brian. Ciao.
Thank you.